Today's reading is a poem by W.S. Merwin. I don't know if you're probably familiar with this book, Earth Prayers. I've gotten quite a bit of good use out of this book over the years. So let me just meet there. Okay. So this is called Listen, W.S. Merwin. Listen, with the night falling, we are saying thank you. We are stopping on the bridges to bow from the railings. We are running out of the glass rooms with our mouths full of food to look at the sky and say thank you. We are standing by the water looking out in different directions. Back from a series of hospitals, back from a mugging, after funerals, we are saying thank you. After the news of the dead, whether or not we knew them, we are saying thank you. Looking up from tables, we are saying thank you. In a culture up to its chin in shame, living in the stench it has chosen, we are saying thank you. Over telephones, we are saying thank you. In doorways and in the backs of cars and elevators. Remembering wars and the police at the back door and the beatings on stairs, we are saying thank you. In the banks that use us, we are saying thank you. With the crooks in office, with the rich and fashionable, unchanged, we go on saying thank you, thank you. With the animals dying around us, our lost feelings, we are saying thank you. With the forests falling faster than the minutes of our lives, we are saying thank you. With the words going out like cells of a brain, with the cities growing over us like the earth, we are saying thank you faster and faster. With nobody listening, we are saying thank you. We are saying thank you and waving, dark though it is. I'm capturing the melancholy of the moment. That's what I'm focusing on in the readings today and in my talk. So when Aaron initially asked me to cover today, this was back before everything happened, the topic was wisdom. So I've been thinking about that. I've had that on my mind over the last several weeks. Even though the sermon series got thrown out the window, I've still been sort of having this thought in my mind of wisdom. So when I hear the word wisdom, I initially think of wisdom literature, which is it's a particular kind of biblical literature. So you think about the kinds of biblical literature, you have historical narrative, legal precepts, prophecy, and wisdom literature, poetry. I mean, there's more kinds, but those are the ones that stick out for me. So wisdom literature in that context includes Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, and Job, and also some apocryphal literature. These are kind of world-weary books. I've always thought of them as a corrective to Deuteronomy. So actually, Job is directly a corrective to Deuteronomy. So the theology in Deuteronomy is, if you do what God tells you to do, then things will be okay with you, and your cows will give milk and your land will be fertile. And it doesn't take long to live in life to realize that theology doesn't work too good. So Ecclesiastes and Job know that that's simplistic literature. So when people say the Bible has an immature theology, it does, but the Bible itself starts to correct that by the inclusion of this wisdom literature. The inclusion of these books, the contradiction to what we tend to think of as biblical theology, shows that the editors of the Bible knew very well that we don't necessarily control the conditions of life or the world. So wisdom is the understanding that creation is beyond our control. So wisdom is like post-knowledge. So knowledge is how the world works, and knowledge is trying to know how the world works, and wisdom is the recognition that even if we know how the world works, we still don't control it. Right? We have a lot of understanding of how things work in our world right now, but still, and nature is under our command to a great extent, but still things happen that are beyond our knowledge and our control. We tend to think, most of the time we tend to think, if we work hard, if we do the right thing, play by the rules, as Bill Clinton used to say, or if we cheat, I guess, then things will be more or less all right. And usually they are. Usually you know, we do things and a result comes back. But there comes a time in everyone's life, in illness, in death, when we realize that we don't have control of the situation. So what do we do then? I think that's a situation that we're in right now. So I'm going to share my screen here. There's my present. Do you see that? Where's my screen?
I don't see it yet.
Okay, there we are.
There you go.
Okay, so we'll start with Ecclesiastes, as I mentioned. So Kohelet is the Hebrew word for Ecclesiastes. I, Kohelet, as king in Jerusalem over Israel, I devoted my mind to wisdom, to investigate all that we do under the sun. So he's a scientist, right? An unhappy business, this life we mortals obsess about. I watched all that is done beneath the sun, and I found it as senseless as feeding on wind. So this is like post, you know, this is world weary. This is like past the end of knowledge. So I think I tried to know everything, and I realized that it's impossible. And so he has doubts about the worth of life because, you know, because the things that he thought would work don't work. A twisted thing cannot be made straight. A shattered thing cannot be made whole. I set my mind to appraise even knowledge, and I learned that this too was chasing wind. As knowledge grows, so grows anxiety. The more you learn, the more you suffer. All right, and then going over to Job, and I'm going to do these two in a row, and then I'll say something about it. So Job, this is the end of Job. So if you remember, Job is very put upon. He's a very righteous guy. He's very put upon. All this terrible stuff happens to him. And then at the end, he has a conversation with God. And he says, this is at the end of it, again, answer said, I know you can do everything. I know that nothing you imagine is beyond your doing. You ask, who is this that obscures counsel without knowledge? True, I spoke without understanding about things which I did not know. Hear now, and I will speak. I will ask, and you will inform me. In the past, I had heard you with my ears. Now I see you with my eyes. Therefore, I surrender to the silence, knowing I am but dust and ash. So right before this, you know, Job had said, I did everything he asked for, and all this terrible stuff happened. And God said, were you there when I created the world? And there's this moment where the questions are not answered. And you have to, and Job has to kind of give up his wish to understand. He spoke without understanding. He had knowledge, but he didn't have understanding. And where I'm going with this is there's a moment of powerlessness, which we are in right now, that we need to, we tend to want to have our questions answered and to know what we're supposed to do. But in a situation like this, sometimes we just have to say, I don't understand, and deepen our spiritual practice. Because it's when we don't have control of the situation that the spiritual practice is the more important, right? Usually we think if we do the right thing, good things will happen, everything will be the way it's supposed to be. And when that doesn't happen, we, like Job, we're like, well, bad things happen to good people. It's not fair, there's no God, whatever. But it's at this moment of being over the edge of our comfort zone that the necessity of taking refuge in spirit is more important. So this literature sounds to me like Buddhist literature. There's a place where Kohelet is at the end of his process, and he gets to the point where Buddha started, right? So Buddha says, suffering is the first rule. Suffering is dukkha, which is, we say suffering, which is very misanthropic, but it's really incapable of being satisfied. The things that we think will work don't work at some point, and that happens to everybody. Truly incapable, like the things that we want to hold on to, the things that we like, we want to reject the things that we don't like. When that happens, we suffer, right? That's a common bond that everybody has. And it's important to recognize, now we're not going to talk about the other noble truths here today, I'm focusing on the first noble truth. But it's important to recognize that the fourth noble truth exists. So we tend to think, Buddhism, or some people tend to think that Buddhism is, pessimistic isn't even a really strong enough word about it because all life is suffering. But there's a possibility of ending that suffering through this process of the Eightfold Path. Right. So even though we're focusing on the first noble truth and this idea of powerlessness, there is a process by which we sort of supersede that. But it's not, us doing our humanly things. It's about this spiritual process, the spiritual path. Because when we get to this point, the humanly things don't work anymore. And we can't just go back to them. And what tends to happen is that we tend to get mad about it and act out in various ways, which I'll come back to again. So that moment of powerlessness, I'm going to use that word again, advisedly so, is where the spiritual leap takes place. So I also sort of hear in this the 12 steps, right? So the 12 steps is, the first step is I admitted powerlessness, right? The second step is there's something beyond me that can help me in this situation. And the third one is I will rely on that thing, or I will turn my attention to that thing, and that will be, that'll be my path. Not because it's going to make us better, not because it's going to make us well, but because that's where we have to go in order to have these questions not even answered, but to have some place to put all that, right? It's when rationality ends that spirituality has to take that leap. And when we say turn our will at our lives, as we've discussed before, I come from a theistic sort of place on this, but I don't think it needs to be God. If you look at these other words for this, I will attempt to deepen my connection with spirit, with source, with creativity, with nature, with divinity, whatever that is. Something I can't rely on myself anymore, and I can't rely on other people. I need to do something, go somewhere deeper. That's the moment that we're in. A couple of quotes on this. Now I have to move this around because okay, there we go. All right, so Pema Chodron, sort of famous Shambhala nun, Tibetan tradition, famous nun and writer, author. The source of our unease is the unfillable longing for a lasting certainty and security for something solid to hold on to. When something unexpected or not to our liking happens, we think something has gone wrong. We are never encouraged to experience the ebb and flow of our moods, of our health, of the weather, of outer events, pleasant and unpleasant, in their fullness. Instead, we stay caught in a fearful, narrow holding pattern of avoiding any pain and continually seeking comfort. This is a universal dilemma. I think this quote speaks exactly to the moment that we're in right now. What do I do when the things that I do don't work anymore, right? And the answer to that is this spiritual practice, right? She has a quote which I took out for the sake of time, which is, we meditate, and then when something happens, we get angry as if we had never meditated before. This is the time, and we certainly have a lot of time to work on it. This is the time for us to pursue our spiritual practice. We certainly have the time to do it. But the recognition, this is so going back to the sort of acceptance, maybe that's the big idea. Acceptance of our situation. You can't act skillfully without accepting the situation that we're in. We want to solve everything. We want it to be fixed, but we want to take a pill and have it be done, but that's not where we are right now. So we're at the sort of, I've said before, we're past the point of the end of our ability to influence events. We think something was gone. Okay, so, and then the next one I wanted to do was Tara Brach. So she has a book called Radical Acceptance, which I think is, if you have access to that book, you should take a look at it now, because I think it really speaks to the moment also. So the way out of our cage begins with accepting absolutely everything about ourselves and our lives by embracing with wakefulness and care our moment-to-moment experience, right? So recognizing, feeling the feelings, not just trying to deaden them with Netflix or what have you. By accepting absolutely everything, what I mean is that we are aware of what is happening within our body and mind at any given moment without trying to control or judge or pull away. I do not mean that we are putting up with harmful behavior. This is an inner process of accepting our actual present moment experience. It means feeling sorrow and pain without resisting. It means feeling desire or dislike for someone or something without judging ourselves for the feeling or being driven to act on it. That's why I've been doing all the sad readings today, because I mean, I know that, I'm in the hope business. I'll talk about this in a moment, but I think it's important that we feel where we are, that we not just try to escape it with hope. I mean, with kind of like a panacea of hope, which is not to say that I don't have hope, but I think it's important that we sort of live in the moment that we're in order to be skillful in how we respond. Right? So to move towards a conclusion here, it's when we are most powerless, when our illusion of control fails us, that spiritual connection and practice is even more important, because there's a truth revealed at these moments that is hidden from us at other times, right? That's where Kohelet is coming from. He gets to that moment of realization, the tools that he's had have failed him, and now what do we do? And there's a truth there that's important to feel and to sit with before we figure out what to do next. So I'm going to unshare my screen here if I can. Stop share. Okay. So if there's something I can't control, I have two potential responses. I can fight it or I can accept it. If I fight it, I make myself and those around me miserable. Accepting it means relying on my spiritual practice. It doesn't mean I like it, doesn't mean I approve of it, but accepting things as they are is the first step to developing a skillful response or effective action. So me, I'm an action person, right? My organization is called Interfaith Action. This is all what I'm all about, right? So I'm a hopeful person and I'm in the hope business, and I'm always trying to convince people that there's a path they can take that will have an impact on their surroundings. But I don't, right at this moment today, on March 22nd, I don't know what to do. I don't have an action to take, right? I don't have clarity. I'm disturbed by what's happening. I'm very, I'm angry at the stupidity of those in power. I'm happy about the ones locally who are doing the right thing. But if I acted now for the sake of doing something, that my actions would not be wise. So the best thing for me to do right now is to take the time to find that place of acceptance, to reconnect spiritually, to pay attention to that, especially at this moment, and to ask for guidance from that source, from that spirit that I rely on in my third step, right? I believe that by doing this, the right course of action will make itself apparent as time goes on. And that I will, right? If I act without clarity, without connection, then I act out. If I connect first and then act, there's a possibility that my actions might be effective and be wise. That is your homily for today. And now I'm going to transition